Spider-Man Brand New Day had a massive job to prove to everyone that Spider-Man's journey is not yet over. I went to watch Spider-Man Brand New Day in the cinema probably more than a week ago, and I wasn't expecting it to be absolutely amazing. I couldn't have been more wrong. This video, which you're going to watch now, is an hour long of me yapping about my personal opinion on how the movie went. I hope you guys enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, after years of speculation, countless rumours, leaked set photos, casting reports, and endless fan theories, Spider-Man Brand New Day is officially here. I had an amazing time watching this movie, but I also think it has a few flaws that stop it from being a complete masterpiece. But before we start, I am Prime Spider-Man 76, and welcome to my channel.
Spider-Man. Here comes the podcast. Spider-Man, mega huge Marvel fan, new bits every day. What you gotta say? Right. Spider-Man, mega Prime Spider-Man.
Well, guys, it is good to be back. It's been 3 weeks since my last video, and I'm just happy to be reviewing more movies with you. So, first of all, let's start off with the positives. The action in Spider-Man Brand New Day is incredible. From the opening sequence to the final battle, every fight has energy behind it. Spider-Man feels fast, agile, and powerful again. The choreography really captures the feeling of someone constantly thinking on the move, using the environment, improvising, and pulling off crazy acrobatic moves. There are several moments where the camera follows Peter swinging through New York, and they generally make you feel like you're right there with him. The filmmakers also do a great job of making Spider-Man feel vulnerable. He gets hit, he struggles, and every fight feels like it has real stakes. That makes the victories much more satisfying. However, as good as the action is, it still doesn't reach the level of TASM 2. Now, before people start typing angry comments, let me explain. For me, TASM 2 still had the greatest Spider-Man action ever put on screen. The web swinging has a level of speed and fluidity that still hasn't been beaten. The way Spider-Man moves feels almost effortless, like he's dancing through the city instead of simply travelling from A to B. Every swing, flip, dodge, and web zip has so much personality. The action in Brand New Day is fantastic, but I never got the same sense of pure freedom and momentum that I get every time watching Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. That doesn't make Brand New Day's action bad, far from it. It's probably some of the best action in the MCU. I just think TASM 2 is still the gold standard when it comes to Spider-Man's movement and web swinging. Another thing I really appreciated was the smaller scale. After No Way Home literally dealt with the multiverse and multiple Spider-Men, it would have been easy for Marvel to try and make the next film even bigger. Instead, they brought things down to earth. The story feels more personal. It's about Peter Parker rebuilding his life, protecting his city, and proving that he can stand on his own without Iron Man, without the Avengers, and without the multiverse carrying the emotional weight. That grounded approach was exactly what this character needed. Now, on to the flaws. My biggest criticism is probably the pacing. The movie moves so quickly from one major scene to the next that there are times where I wish it slowed down and let certain emotional moments breathe. Some conversations end just as they're getting interesting, and a few character moments could have had more impact with just another minute or two of screen time. There are also a couple of supporting characters that don't get as much development as I would have liked. They're enjoyable whenever they're on screen, but I walked away wishing we had spent a little more time with them because they had real potential. Another issue I had was that a few plot developments felt a little convenient. Without going into spoilers, there were moments where things happened because the story needed them to happen, rather than because they felt completely natural. It wasn't enough to ruin the experience, but it's something I definitely noticed. Despite those flaws, I honestly had a smile on my face for most of the runtime. This movie understands what makes Spider-Man such a beloved character. He's funny, he keeps getting back up no matter how hard life knocks him down, and Brand New Day captures that spirit incredibly well. Is it perfect? No. Does it have pacing issues? Yes. Could some characters have been developed more? Absolutely. But even with those criticisms, I think Marvel has delivered one of the strongest Spider-Man films in the MCU, and it's a fantastic step forwards from Tom Holland's version of the character. But before we get into the deeper parts of this movie, I want to talk about something that I think is actually the biggest achievement of Brand New Day, and that is Peter Parker himself. Because after everything that happened in No Way Home, Marvel had a huge challenge. How do you continue the story of a character who has basically lost everything? Peter Parker has always been a hero who sacrifices, but in No Way Home, that sacrifice reached a completely different level. He didn't just lose a battle, he didn't just lose a fight against a villain, he lost his entire life. And Brand New Day doesn't just ignore that. It doesn't pretend that everything is okay. It doesn't suddenly make Peter Parker happy again just because this is a new movie. The film understands that Peter is still carrying that pain. And honestly, that is one of the strongest parts of the entire movie. One thing that makes Spider-Man different from almost every other superhero is that the mask is not what makes him interesting. It's the person underneath it. Anyone can wear the suit. Anyone can shoot webs. Anyone can swing through New York. But only Peter Parker has to deal with the consequences. And Brand New Day focuses on that. We see a Spider-Man who's more experienced, more confident, and honestly, more impressive than any ever before. But we also see a Peter Parker who is more alone than ever. The contrast is what makes this movie work. When the mask is on, he's Spider-Man, he is the hero, he's the person everyone needs. But when the mask comes off, he's just Peter, and Peter is struggling. I think one of my favourite things about the version of Peter is that he finally feels like the Spider-Man many fans have been waiting to see. Not because the previous movies were bad. Once again, far from it. Tom Holland's Spider-Man has always been great, but this feels like the next stage of his journey. In his first appearances, Peter was learning what it meant to be a hero. He was still a kid, he was still looking for approval, he wanted to prove himself, especially after meeting Tony Stark. There was always a feeling that Peter was trying to find his place among bigger heroes. But now, that is completely gone. There is no one telling him what to do, nobody giving him technology, nobody showing up to save him. This is Peter Parker standing completely on his own, and that is exactly what makes him feel like Spider-Man. Another thing I loved is that the movie understands the importance of failure. A lot of superhero movies make their heroes look unstoppable. They win every fight. They always have the perfect plan. They always know exactly what to do. Spider-Man has never been that. Peter Parker wins because he refuses to quit. He gets knocked down, he makes mistakes, he doesn't always know the answer, but he keeps trying. And Brand New Day captures that perfectly. There are moments where Peter is clearly exhausted, moments where you can tell he is questioning whether being Spider-Man is worth everything he has lost. And those moments are what make him heroic, because being Spider-Man isn't easy. It's not about having powers, it's about choosing to help people even when your own life is falling apart. And that leads me into one of the saddest parts of the movie, the loneliness. Because this might generally be the most isolated version of Peter Parker we've ever seen. Think about everything he's lost. The people closest to him don't even remember him. The life he built is gone. The relationships he had are gone. And yet, every single day, he still puts on the suit. He still swings through the city. And he still saves people, even though nobody knows the sacrifices he's making. And that is such a Spider-Man thing. A lot of heroes get rewarded. They get celebrated, they get statues, they get recognised. Peter Parker often gets the opposite. He saves the day, and then he goes home alone. That is what makes him so relatable. He isn't a hero because he gets praised. He's a hero because it's the right thing to do. And honestly, that emotional side is where Brand New Day surprised me the most. Because underneath all the action, all the jokes, all the incredible Spider-Man moments, this is actually a movie about rebuilding. About someone who has lost everything and deciding that his story isn't over. Peter Parker has every reason to give up, but he doesn't. He starts again. He creates a new life. He becomes Spider-Man. Not because he has something to prove, but because he knows people need him. And that message is something I think a lot of people would connect with. Because everyone goes through the moments where life doesn't go the way they planned. Everyone has moments where they have to start over. And that's exactly what makes the title Brand New Day so meaningful. It's not just a reference, it's Peter Parker's entire journey. A new beginning, a second chance, a reminder that no matter how badly things go, you can always get back up. Now, let's get into the part that I know a lot of Spider-Man fans were waiting for, the action. Because let's be honest, when you go watch a Spider-Man movie, one of the biggest questions is always, does it make me feel like I'm actually going to watch Spider-Man? And for me, Brand New Day absolutely delivers that. Like I said earlier, it isn't as good as TASM 2. The action isn't as good as TASM 2. But it doesn't mean the action's not good. It's fantastic. This movie understands that Spider-Man's fighting style is completely different from almost every other superhero. He's not just someone who stands there and throws punches. He's not a character who wins because he's the strongest person in the room. Spider-Man wins because he's creative. He's quick, he's unpredictable, and he uses everything around him as a weapon. And that is something this movie gets right. One of my favourite things about the action is how much movement there is. Spider-Man is constantly doing something. He's jumping, flipping, changing direction, or using his webs in creative ways. And every movement feels like it comes from the character. It doesn't feel like the normal action hero who happens to have Spider-Man powers. It feels like Spider-Man. There are moments where Peter is surrounded by enemies, and instead of just attacking one person at a time, he uses the entire environment. He swings objects around, he traps opponents with webs, he uses his intelligence just as much as his strength. And that is what separates Spider-Man from so many other heroes. The choreography is also a massive improvement because it shows Peter's experience. This isn't the same Spider-Man we saw at the beginning of his journey. That younger Peter was still learning. He was still figuring out how to use his powers. Sometimes he relied on technology. Sometimes he made mistakes because he was still a kid. But Brand New Day shows a Spider-Man who's been through battles that most heroes could never imagine. He's fought villains from different universes. He has lost people he loves. He had an entire identity erased, and that experience shows in the fights. He moves like someone who knows exactly what they are doing. But now we have to talk about the comparison everyone always brings up. The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In the Escape podcast, I was watching how Alex Azor believed that Brand New Day's action was very good, but not as good as TASM 2. And me, being a massive Andrew Garfield fan, I totally agree. I still don't think anything has topped Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man when it comes to pure movement. And I do want to make this clear. This isn't me saying Brand New Day has bad action. It doesn't. Actually, I think it has some of the best Spider-Man action we have ever seen. But TASM 2 has something special. It has a feeling of freedom, a feeling of speed, a feeling that Spider-Man wasn't just moving through New York. He belonged there. The web swing in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is still unbelievable. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man moves through the city like he is having fun. Every swing has personality. Every flip has style. Every landing feels natural. There is a confidence to that Spider-Man that is incredibly difficult to recreate. The famous swinging sequences from that movie still feel like some of the most accurate representations of what being Spider-Man would actually feel like. It looks like Peter Parker is generally enjoying being Spider-Man, and that's something Brand New Day comes close to, but it doesn't completely surpass. Where Brand New Day does succeed, though, is making the fights feel heavier emotionally. Because this isn't just Spider-Man fighting because there's a villain causing trouble. Every fight feels connected to Peter's personal journey. He isn't just protecting a city, he's trying to prove himself that he can keep going. He's fighting because helping people is one thing that keeps him connected to the person that he used to be. And that gives the action more meaning. Another thing I really liked is how vulnerable Spider-Man feels. Sometimes superhero movies forget that the reason we care about the characters is because they can lose. If the hero is completely unstoppable, the danger disappears. But Spider-Man has always been different. Even with his powers, Peter Parker is still human. He gets hurt, he struggles, he gets overwhelmed, and Brand New Day remembers that. There are moments when you genuinely worry about him, not because you think Spider-Man will lose forever, but because you know every victory comes with a cost. The final battle especially shows this. Without going into every detail, what makes it work isn't just the scale, it's the emotion behind it. The best Spider-Man fights we have always been much more than just punches and explosions. Think about the train fight in Spider-Man 2. Think about the bridge sequence in No Way Home. Think about the clock tower battle in TASM 2. The reason those scenes are remembered is because they are about Peter Parker, not just Spider-Man. Brand New Day understands that idea. The action does look amazing, but the reason it works is because you care about the person inside the suit. So, overall, is the action in Brand New Day the best Spider-Man action ever? Me, personally, I don't think so. For me, TASM 2 still holds that crown for pure movement, web swinging, and making Spider-Man feel like Spider-Man. But is Brand New Day's action incredible? Absolutely. It is exciting, creative, beautifully filmed, and most importantly, it understands that Spider-Man's greatest weapon isn't just his strength, it's his ability to keep going on and fighting. No matter how many times he falls, no matter how many times he loses, he always finds a way to get back up. And that is why Spider-Man remains one of the greatest superheroes ever made. Now, let's move away from the action for a moment, because as impressive as the fights are, the reason Spider-Man movies become memorable isn't just because of the action, it's because of the story. And I think Brand New Day succeeds because it understands something very important. A Spider-Man story is not really about the powers, it's about the person. It's about Peter Parker trying to balance two completely different lives. The life where he is Spider-Man and the life where he is just Peter. One of the biggest challenges this movie had was following No Way Home, because, let's be honest, No Way Home was massive. It had 3 Spider-Men, it had returning villains, it had the multiverse, and it had years of Spider-Man history coming back together in one movie. So after something that huge, the easy choice would have just been to make the next movie even bigger. More villains, more universes, more cameos, more spectacle. But Brand New Day makes a much smarter decision. It focuses on Peter Parker, not the multiverse, not the bigger MCU, not trying to compete with Avengers-level events, just Peter. And that is exactly what the character needed. For years, Spider-Man has worked best when his problems feel personal. The reason Spider-Man fans love the movies like Spider-Man 2 is because Peter isn't just fighting Doc Ock, he's fighting against his own life falling apart. He can't balance being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker. He loses people, he loses confidence, he questions whether being a hero is worth the sacrifice, and Brand New Day brings that same feeling back. The biggest battle isn't always against the villain. Sometimes the biggest battle is inside Peter's own mind. I also liked how the movie shows the consequences of Peter's decisions at the end of No Way Home. A lot of movies would have treated that ending as something that happened in the past, something to quickly mention before moving on. But Brand New Day understands that something like that would completely change a person. Imagine losing everyone who knows you. Imagine walking through the same places you used to visit with the people you love, but now nobody remembers those memories. That is generally heartbreaking, and the movie doesn't forget it. This is where Tom Holland's performance really shines, because Peter doesn't need to constantly explain how he feels. You can see it. The way he reacts to certain situations, the way he hesitates, the way he tries to keep moving forward even when he's clearly struggling. There is a maturity to this version of Peter. He's not the teenager who wants to prove himself anymore. He's someone who has already made the ultimate sacrifice, and now he has to live with that choice. Another thing that makes Brand New Day work is that Peter isn't suddenly fixed. Sometimes superhero movies make characters go through a huge emotional event and the next movie acts like everything is normal. But Peter doesn't just wake up one day and forget what happened. The sadness is still there. The loneliness is still there. But instead of letting that destroy him, he uses it as motivation. And that is one of the most important parts of the Spider-Man's character. Peter Parker suffers. But suffering doesn't make him give up. It makes him stronger. The movie also does a great job showing the difference between Peter Parker and Spider-Man, because they almost feel like two different people. Spider-Man is confident, Spider-Man is funny, Spider-Man is the person everyone sees. But Peter Parker is the person nobody sees. And that contrast creates some of the most emotional moments in the movie. When Peter is wearing the mask, he can be the hero everyone needs. When the mask comes off, he has to deal with everything he's lost. And honestly, this is why the title Brand New Day works so well. Because this isn't just about a new adventure. It's about starting again. Peter doesn't get the perfect ending. He doesn't get everything back. He doesn't get the easy path. Instead, he gets a chance to rebuild. And that is much more interesting, because Spider-Man has never been a character who gets everything he wants. He's a character who keeps moving forward despite not getting what he wants. However, the story isn't perfect, and that is where some of the criticisms of the movie are fair. The biggest problem is that sometimes it feels like the movie has way too many ideas. There are moments where you can tell that there are a lot of interesting directions the story could have taken. And while the most of them work, a few ideas feel like they needed more time. Certain emotional moments happened quickly, certain character relationships could have been explored further, and there were moments where I found myself thinking, that was a great scene, but I wish we got more of it. I think the biggest compliment and criticism you can give Brand New Day is that it makes you want more. You want longer conversations, you want more character development, you want more time with Peter just being Peter. But when the movie slows down and focuses on him, that's when it is at its best. And that brings us to the next major part of the movie, the characters. Because while Peter is obviously the heart of the story, a Spider-Man movie is only as good as the people around him. And Brand New Day introduces some interesting characters, brings back important relationships, and creates some of the most emotional moments of the entire film. Now, let's talk about one of the most important parts of any Spider-Man movie, the characters. Because Spider-Man has always been a character where the people around Peter matter just as much as the villains he fights. You can have incredible action, you can have amazing visual effects, you can have huge battles. But if you don't care about the people involved, the movie won't have the same impact. And thankfully, Brand New Day does a good job introducing characters who actually feel like they belong in Peter Parker's world. Obviously, we have to start with Peter, because everything in the movie revolves around him. And what I really liked is that he doesn't feel like the same Peter Parker we saw at the beginning of Tom Holland's journey. He wanted to be part of something bigger. He wanted to prove himself. But this Peter understands the cost. He knows that every time he puts on the suit, he is choosing responsibility over his own happiness, and that makes his journey much more interesting. One of the best things about Peter in this movie is that he feels more independent. For the first time in this version of the character, he's not being guided by Tony Stark. Well, because Tony Stark kind of died like ages ago. But anyway, he's not trying to impress the Avengers. He's not waiting for someone older and more experienced to tell him what to do. He has to make his own decisions. And that is something Spider-Man fans have been wanting to see for a long time. Because at the end of the day, Spider-Man works best when Spider-Man has to stand on his own. The new characters introduced in Brand New Day are interesting because they don't just exist to move the plot forward. They each bring something different to Peter's story. Some challenge him, some remind him of the life he lost, some force him to question the choices he made, and that's exactly what good supporting characters should do. They shouldn't just stand next to the hero, they should just reveal something about the hero. One thing I appreciate about the new characters is that they help show different sides of Peter, because sometimes Peter Parker can be trapped in the Spider-Man role. He becomes so focused on saving everyone else that he forgets about himself. The new characters force him to confront that. They remind him that even heroes need people around them. Even Spider-Man can't carry everything alone. Something Spider-Man movies have always understood is that Peter Parker needs connections. Peter isn't Batman. He isn't a character who works best completely alone, even though he often feels lonely. Relationships he builds are what keep him going. Think about the importance of Harry Osborn, Mary Jane, Aunt May, Gwen Stacy, Ned. These characters are not just for the story, they are part of Peter's identity. They represent the life Peter is constantly trying to protect. And Brand New Day continues that idea. The movie understands that Peter's biggest struggle is only defeating villains. It's trying to have a normal life while knowing he can never truly have a normal life. That is the curse of Spider-Man. He wants to be Peter Parker, but the world needs Spider-Man. One of the reasons the movie hits harder emotionally isn't because the characters don't just talk about Peter's pain, they show it. You can see how different Peter is compared to previous movies. The confidence is still there, the jokes are still there, but underneath all of that, there is someone who has lost a lot, and the people around him slowly reveal that. Sometimes the strongest emotional moments are not the huge dramatic scenes. Sometimes it's just a small conversation, a look, a reaction, a moment where Peter almost says something, but decides not to. Those are the moments where the character's writing really works. However, I do think there is one area where the movie could have improved. Some of the new characters are generally interesting, but I wanted more. I wanted more time with them, more conversations, more moments where we could understand who they are beyond the main story. Because whenever the movie slows down and focuses on character moments, that's when it becomes really strong. There are definitely characters where I left the cinema thinking, I wish we got another scene with them. Not because they were bad, actually the opposite, because they were good enough that I wanted more attention from them. That's a good problem to have. A bad character makes you want less screen time. A great character makes you wish the movie was longer, and Brand New Day has several moments where I felt that way. Another thing I liked is that these characters don't feel like they were created just to set up another movie. The feel connected to Peter's current journey. Everything comes back to the same question. Who is Peter Parker now? Not who was he before, not who people expect him to be, who he is after everything he's been through. And that is what makes Brand New Day such an interesting chapter. It's not about creating the biggest possible threat, it's not about adding the most characters, it's about watching Peter rebuild his world, and the characters around him are an important part of that. But now, we have to talk about the part every Spider-Man fan loves discussing, the villains. Because the Spider-Man movie lives or dies based on whether the villains feel like real threats. And Brand New Day has some very interesting choices when it comes to who stands against Peter. because these villains don't just challenge Spider-Man physically, they challenge Peter Parker personally. Because let's be honest, a Spider-Man movie is only as strong as the characters Peter has to overcome. Spider-Man has one of the greatest collections of villains in comic book history. Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Venom, the Lizard, Electro, the Vulture, Mysterio. I could personally keep going on forever. And the reason so many of these villains are remembered is because they aren't just obstacles for Spider-Man to punch. They represent something. They challenge Peter's beliefs. They challenge his choices. They force him to look at himself. And I think Brand New Day understands that idea. One thing I really appreciate about the villains in this movie is that they don't feel like they're just there because the movie needs a big action scene. They actually connect to Peter's story. The best Spider-Man villains have always been characters who make Peter Parker question himself. They make him ask, am I doing the right thing? Is being Spider-Man actually helping? How much more am I willing to sacrifice? And Brand New Day continues that tradition. Something that separates Spider-Man's villains from many other superhero villains is that they usually have a connection to Peter's everyday life. They aren't just random threats who appear from nowhere. They often represent a darker version of Peter, a version of what he could become if he made different choices. That's what made villains like Doc Ock and Green Goblin so powerful. They weren't just enemies, they were reflections of Peter. Brand New Day focuses that same idea. The villains challenge Peter in ways that go beyond physical strength. Of course, the fights are amazing, the battles are very exciting, but the best moments are when the villains force Peter to make difficult decisions. Because that is where Spider-Man stories are at their best. Another thing I liked is that the movie doesn't make Peter feel completely unstoppable. This is very important, because sometimes superhero movies make their heroes too powerful that you stop worrying about them. You know that they will win all the time, so you sit back and watch the superhero win over and over and over again. But with Brand New Day, there is a real sense of danger. Peter is powerful, but his enemies are also very dangerous. They push him, they make him adapt, they force him to think, and that creates some of the best action scenes in this movie. A big part of Spider-Man's appeal is that he isn't the strongest superhero. There are characters in the MCU who could overpower him. There are characters who are physically stronger, but Peter survives because of his intelligence, his creativity, his determination, and his ability to keep going when everyone else would give up. The villains in Brand New Day highlight that perfectly. The strongest thing about these villains is their presence. When they are on screen, you pay attention. They bring a different energy to the movie. They create tension. They make you wonder what Peter is going to do next. And a great villain should always make the audience feel something. They don't necessarily have to agree with them. You don't even need to like them. But you should understand why they became who they are. The best villains aren't evil just because their story needs someone bad. They have reasons, they have emotions, they have their own perspective. And when a movie gets that right, the conflict becomes much more interesting. Because then, the question isn't just, can Spider-Man defeat them? The question becomes, can Peter Parker stop them without losing himself? However, I do think this is another area where the movie could have gone even further. Some of the villains are fantastic, but I think certain parts of the stories could have been explored more. There are moments where you can understand their motivations, but you wish the movie spent more time showing how they became that way. Because sometimes the best villain moments are not the fights. They're the quiet scenes, the moments where you can understand the person behind the threat. Think about Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2. His best moments aren't just when fighting Spider-Man. It's when you see the tragedy of Otto Octavius. You understand the man underneath the villain. Think about Green Goblin in the original Spider-Man. The most memorable parts aren't only the action, it's the relationship between Norman and Peter. The emotional connection is what makes the villains legendary. Brand New Day gets close to that level, but there are moments where I wanted more. More backstory, more character development, more time understanding their perspective, because the foundation is there. The ideas are interesting, the performances are strong. I just wanted the movie to explore them even deeper. This is always a difficult comparison because Spider-Man has some of the incredible villains. The Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man remains one of the most iconic superhero villains ever. Doc Ock is still considered by many fans to be one of the best comic book movie villains ever created, and the Vulture brought something different because he was grounded and personal. Mysterio was memorable because of the psychological battle he created, and even Electro from TASM 2, while controversial among fans, he had some of the most visually impressive scenes in the franchise. Where Brand New Day villains succeed is that they fit this version of Peter. They belong in this story. They challenge the Spider-Man we have now. This isn't the same Peter from the beginning of his journey. So the villains need to challenge a more experienced and more mature version of Spider-Man, and I think they do that successfully. Overall, I think Brand New Day delivers some really solid villains. Are they better than every previous Spider-Man villain? No. That is an extremely difficult standard because Spider-Man has some of the all-time greatest villains. But did they work for this movie? Absolutely. They create exciting action, they challenge Peter emotionally, and they help to continue the story of Spider-Man, who is trying to rebuild his life. The villains may not be perfect, but they are another reason why this movie works. Now, we talked about Peter, we've talked about the characters, we have talked about the villains. There's one more thing that makes Spider-Man movie memorable: the world around him, the city, the visuals, the feeling of being Spider-Man. And next, we'll talk about how Brand New Day brings New York City back to its life. Now, one thing that gets overlooked when people talk about Spider-Man movies is the importance of New York City. Because New York isn't just a place where Spider-Man happens to live. New York is a part of who Spider-Man is. It's almost like another character in the story. When you think of Spider-Man, you think of skyscrapers, you think of crowded streets, you think of Peter swinging between buildings, protecting ordinary people, going about everyday lives. And Brand New Day understands that. One of the biggest strengths of this movie is how much personality New York has. It doesn't feel like the random CGI background. It feels like a real place. A place full of people. A place full of problems. A place where Peter Parker can disappear into the crowd when he takes the mask off, but become the most important person in the city when he puts it back on. And that contrast is what makes Spider-Man special. A lot of superhero movies focus on saving the entire world, or the galaxy, or the universe, or the multiverse. And while the stories can be amazing, Spider-Man has always worked best when the stakes feel closer. When the person he saves is just one person. When the danger is happening in his neighborhood. When Peter is helping people who will probably never even know his name. That is what makes heroism so powerful. One of my favourite things about Brand New Day is that it remembers the everyday hero side of Spider-Man. Yes, there are huge battles. Yes, there are incredible action scenes. But there are also moments where Peter is simply helping people. Stopping crimes, protecting strangers, doing the thing that don't make the news. And those moments are important because they show why Peter wears the suit. Not for fame. Not for recognition. Not because he wants to be celebrated. He does it because he knows he can help. Now, let's talk about how the movie looks. Because visually, Brand New Day is one of the strongest looking Spider-Man films. The cinematography does a fantastic job capturing both the sides of Peter's life. When he's Spider-Man, the movie feels energetic, fast, full of movement. The camera makes you feel the excitement of swinging through the city. But when Peter is alone, the visuals become quieter, more emotional. The city feels bigger around him. And that helps to show how isolated Peter feels sometimes. That contrast is something great Spider-Man movies always understand. The mask represents freedom, The suit represents confidence. But Peter Parker underneath the mask is just a normal person. Someone trying to figure things out. Someone dealing with problems that don't just disappear overnight because he has superpowers. Another thing fans always care about is the Spider-Man suit. And honestly, Brand New Day absolutely delivers. The suit feels like a celebration of classic Spider-Man. It has the right balance between comic accuracy and practicality. It doesn't feel like an Iron Man suit. It doesn't feel like technology is doing the work for him. It feels like something Peter Parker created. Something personal. Something that belongs to him. And I think that's important because the suit represents where Peter is in his journey. Early in the MCU, Peter had access to advanced technology. He had resources, he had help, but now the suit represents independence. It represents Peter becoming the Spider-Man he was always meant to be. I think one of the most smartest decisions Marvel made was not trying to make Brand New Day bigger than No Way Home. Because honestly, how do you make something bigger than 3 Spider-Men? How do you top the multiverse? Well, I've got one answer. You don't. Instead, you go smaller, you go more personal, and that is exactly what Spider-Man needs. Some fans always want superhero movies to constantly increase the scale. More villains, more heroes, bigger explosions, bigger threats. But sometimes bigger doesn't mean better. Sometimes the more powerful stories are the ones that focus on one person, one struggle, one choice, and Brand New Day understands that. And this actually leads perfectly into something else I want to talk about. The person responsible for bringing all of this together, the director. Because when you look at how Brand New Day handles New York, how it handles Peter's emotions, how it balances comedy, action, and drama, you can see that this wasn't just about making another superhero movie. It was about understanding Spider-Man. And that is why I think the director was such a perfect choice for this project. A great Spider-Man director needs to understand that the city matters, the action matters, the visuals matter, but above everything else, Peter Parker matters. They need to understand that behind the mask is a person, someone who struggles, and someone who sacrifices. And that understanding is exactly what makes Brand New Day work. Because the director didn't just focus on making Spider-Man look cool. They focused on making us care about Peter Parker. And in my opinion, that was the most important thing they could have done. So now, let's probably talk about the director. Why I think they were the perfect person for the job. What experience they brought to this movie. And why their previous work made them such a great fit for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Destin Daniel Cretton. I think Marvel made an excellent choice bringing him in for this movie, because when you hear the name Destin Daniel Cretton, you might not immediately think that's the perfect Spider-Man director. But when you look at his previous work, it makes a lot of sense, because Spider-Man has never just been about action. Yes, the swinging is important. Yes, the fights are important. Yes, the villains are important. But at the centre of everything is emotion. And emotional storytelling is something Daniel Cretton has always been very good at. Before directing Brand New Day, Cretton built a reputation for making character-driven movies. One of his biggest films was Short Term 12. This was a much smaller movie compared to a Marvel blockbuster, but it showed exactly what Cretton's biggest strength is: understanding people, understanding their struggles, and understanding their emotions. The movie focused heavily on characters and their personal journeys, and it showed that Cretton wasn't just interested in spectacle, he was interested in making audiences care. And that is exactly what a Spider-Man movie needs. Then came The Glass Castle, a drama starring Brie Larson, Woody Harrelson, and Naomi Watts. Again, it was a very character-focused story. It explored complicated relationships, family struggles, and people dealing with difficult situations. And while it was completely different from Spider-Man in terms of genre, the emotional skills needed to tell the story are very similar. Because Peter Parker is also a character who carries a lot of pain. He has to deal with loss, responsibility, to keep moving forward even when things are almost impossible. Those themes are exactly the kinds of things Cretton has experienced exploring. Then, of course, Cretan entered the Marvel Universe with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And this is where I think Marvel really saw why he was such a good fit for Spider-Man. Because Shang-Chi proved that he could handle huge action sequences. The movie had incredible fight choreography, it had impressive visual effects, it had massive set pieces. But what made it work wasn't just the action, it was the emotional story underneath. The relationship between Shang-Chi and his family, the decisions he had to make, the person he wanted to become, the conflict between his past and his future. Sound familiar? Because that is exactly the kind of emotional conflict Peter Parker goes through. Shang-Chi also showed that Cretan understands something very important about superhero movies. That power is not what makes the character interesting. The person underneath the suit is. The abilities are just the surface. The real story is about who that person is when nobody's watching. And that is the perfect mindset for Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man isn't special because he can climb walls. He isn't special because he can swing across New York. He's special because Peter Parker continues doing the right thing even when his own life is falling apart. I think another reason Cretan was such a good choice is because Brand New Day needed someone who could balance different tones. Spider-Man movies are incredibly difficult because they need to be funny, emotional, exciting, and sometimes heartbreaking all at the same time. You need the audience laughing at 1 minute and then feeling emotional the next. That balance is not easy. But looking at Cretan's previous movies, you can see that he understands how to move between different emotions. A director could have made Brand New Day a simple action movie, and it probably would have still been entertaining, but that wouldn't have been enough. Spider-Man fans don't just want to see Peter punch villains, they want to understand him. They want to feel his struggles, they want to see why he keeps going, and I think Cretan understood that assignment perfectly. Another thing that I thought he brought to the movie was a different perspective. Every Spider-Man director has their own style. Sam Raimi made Spider-Man feel like a classic superhero tragedy. Mark Webb made Spider-Man feel young, emotional, and visually free. Jon Watts made Spider-Man feel like he belonged inside the MCU. And Destin Daniel Cretton brings something totally different. He brings a focus on character, a focus on relationships, a focus on what happens inside Peter's head. And that is exactly what this chapter of Spider-Man needed. Because after No Way Home, the biggest question wasn't, could Spider-Man fight a bigger villain? The question was, who is Peter Parker now? And that is why Cretan was the right person. He wasn't just making a movie about a superhero, he was making a movie about someone who lost everything and has to find a reason to keep going on. So when I look back at Brand New Day, I think Destin Daniel Cretton deserves a lot of credit. He respected what came before, he understood what fans loved about Spider-Man, but he also helped move the character forward. He didn't try to copy Raimi, or Webb, or Watts. He created his own version of Spider-Man, and in my opinion, that is exactly what this movie needed. Because the best Spider-Man movies don't come from trying to recreate the past, they come from understanding the character and finding a new way to tell their story. And that brings us to a huge part of Brand New Day. The moments that made this movie stand out. The scenes that made fans cheer, the scenes that made fans emotional, and the moments that I think people will still be talking about years from now. From this point on, I am probably going to be including quite a few spoilers, so if you haven't watched this movie already, stop it now, go watch it because it's absolutely fantastic, and yeah, if you really don't care about spoilers, listen on. From this point onwards, I'm going to be talking about the biggest moments, reveals, and emotional scenes from Spider-Man Brand New Day. This is your final spoiler warning, so if you haven't watched the movie yet, click away now. The first major thing that this movie does is show us what Peter's life is actually like after the ending of No Way Home. And honestly, this might be one of the most interesting directions Marvel could have taken, because a lot of people wondered, what happens after everyone forgets Peter Parker? And Brand New Day actually explores the consequences. Peter isn't magically okay. He isn't suddenly over everything that happened. He is still dealing with the fact that the people he cares about most have no idea who he is. And I think that is the most that makes the opening of this movie so effective. It doesn't just say, Peter lost everything. It shows it. We see a Peter Parker who has completely rebuilt his life. He has a new routine, a new identity, a new way of existing in the world. But emotionally, he's still stuck carrying everything that's happened. And that creates a really interesting version of Spider-Man, because physically, he's probably the most experienced version of Tom Holland's Peter we've ever seen. But emotionally, he's still trying to heal. One of the biggest themes of this movie is Peter becoming independent, and that is something a lot of fans were waiting for. Throughout the MCU, Peter had connections to bigger heroes. He had Tony Stark, he had advanced technology, he had access to things most versions of Spider-Man never had. And while that was interesting, Brand New Day finally shows Peter without those things. No mentor, no safety net, no one coming to save him. Just Peter Parker. And honestly, this is where Tom Holland's Spider-Man feels the most complete, because Spider-Man has always been about some ordinary person choosing to do something extraordinary. Peter doesn't need the best technology. He doesn't need someone telling him that he's a hero. He already knows what responsibility means, because like his Uncle Ben said, in this universe it's different, like his Aunt May said, with great power comes great responsibility. And watching him create his own path is one of the most satisfying parts of the movie. Now, let's talk about one of the most emotional parts of the movie, Peter and MJ, because their relationship has always been one of the biggest emotional parts of this trilogy. And after No Way Home, their situation became incredibly heartbreaking. Peter remembers everything, MJ doesn't, and Brand New Day doesn't ignore how painful that is. The movie does a great job showing the difference between knowing someone and being remembered by someone. For Peter, MJ is the person he loves. He remembers every moment they shared, every conversation, every experience. But for MJ, Peter is basically a stranger, and that creates a completely different kind of heartbreak. What makes the scenes work is that Peter has a choice. He could tell MJ everything. He could try to bring back the relationship they had, but he also knows why he made the sacrifice. He knows that bringing everything back could put people in danger, and that is classic Spider-Man, doing the right thing even when it hurts. Now, let's talk about the action, because there is one sequence in particular that shows exactly why this movie works. The biggest action scene isn't just impressive because of the visuals, it's impressive because it represents everything Peter has become. This isn't just a beginner Spider-Man, this isn't someone randomly throwing punches and hoping for the best. This is a Spider-Man who has learned from years of experience. The choreography shows how smart Peter is. He doesn't just overpower his enemies, he studies them, he adapts, he uses his surroundings, he thinks ahead. And that is what makes Spider-Man different from other superheroes. His greatest ability isn't strength, like Hulk. It's intelligence. One of the strongest moments in the movie comes when Peter has to make another impossible decision. And that is where the movie really understands the character, because Peter is constantly forced to choose between his own happiness and doing what is right. That has always been his greatest struggle. The easy choice would be to choose himself, to finally have a normal life, to stop sacrificing, to stop suffering, but Pete doesn't do that, because deep down, he knows who he is. He is Spider-Man, and Spider-Man doesn't help people because it's easy, he helps people because he has to. One thing I really appreciate about the villain storyline is that the movie doesn't make the conflict simple. It isn't just good guy versus bad guy. The villain has understandable motivations. There is a reason behind these actions, and that's what makes the conflicts much more interesting. Jean Grey, played by Sadie Sink. Holy, that is one messed up story. The best Spider-Man villains always have some sort of connection to Peter's own struggles. They represent choices Peter could have made, and they show what happens when someone allows pain and anger to control them. And Brand New Day continues that tradition. Without a doubt, one of the biggest emotional moments of the entire movie comes when Peter is forced to face the reality of the situation. The fact that being Spider-Man has cost him so much. The fact that nobody knows the sacrifices he has made. The fact that he saved the people who will never know what he gave up. And that is why Spider-Man is such a powerful character. because he didn't do the right thing because people will thank him. He does it because because some people have to. And if nobody remembers, and if nobody knows, who cares? Finally, let's talk about the ending, because I think the final moments of Brand New Day are extremely important for where Peter goes next. The movie isn't saying Peter is finally happy, it's saying something much more interesting. Peter has accepted who he is. He understands that being Spider-Man will always come with a sacrifice, but he also understands that life isn't defined only by what he has lost. The ending feels like a true beginning. And Brand New Day? Peter isn't going backwards. He isn't trying to recreate the life he had before. He is moving forwards. And that is why this movie works so well as the next chapter of Tom Holland's Spider-Man story. So overall, the biggest spoilers in Brand New Day all come back to one idea. Peter Parker loses a lot. But he never loses what makes him Spider-Man. His compassion, determination, willingness to sacrifice, and his ability to get back up. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. Now, I want to talk about the ending, because for me, the ending of Brand New Day is what brings the entire movie together. And I'm not talking about the last 15 minutes, I'm talking about this dead ending. After everything Peter's gone through, after losing so much, after being forced to start his life again, the movie leaves us with one of the most important relationships in Peter Parker's story. Peter and Ned. One of the most emotional things about their relationship is that Peter remembers everything. He remembers the friendship they had. All the moments when Ned was the person standing beside him when things got difficult. But after No Way Home, that history only exists for Peter. And that's such a heartbreaking idea. Imagine having years of memories with someone, knowing that that person was one of your closest friends, but they don't remember it. That is the kind of emotional pain that makes Peter Parker's story so interesting. What makes the ending work is that Peter isn't trying to force the past to come back. He isn't trying to selfishly get back the life he lost. He has learned something important. Sometimes you can't go back. Sometimes the only thing you can do is move forward. And that's a very important Spider-Man lesson. The relationship between Peter and Ned has always been important because Ned represents something Peter desperately needs. A friend. Someone who sees Peter Parker as Peter Parker, not just Spider-Man. Because one of Peter's biggest struggles is that everyone needs the hero, but very few people get to know the person underneath the mask. Ned was one of those people. And seeing Peter's face, that loss is generally sad. But what I love about the ending is that it isn't just completely hopeless, because Spider-Man stories have always been about hope. Even when Peter loses, even when life becomes difficult, even when things seem impossible, he keeps going. And the ending shows that Peter doesn't need everything to go back to the way it was before. He can create something new. A new life, a new future, a brand new day. I think this is a perfect message for this version of Spider-Man. The younger Peter wanted to prove himself. He wanted to be a part of something bigger. But this Peter understands something much deeper. Being Spider-Man isn't about having the perfect life. It isn't about everyone knowing your name. It isn't about the praise. It's about making the right choice, even when nobody sees it, even when nobody thanks you. And that is why I think the ending works so well. Because Peter finally accepts who he is. Not the Spider-Man everyone expects him to be. Not the hero connected to the bigger teams or bigger battles. Just Spider-Man. A person who chooses to help, because that is who he is. So, after spending this entire video talking about the action, characters, villains, and the emotional moments, and everything that made Brand New Day special, where do I stand? I think Spider-Man Brand New Day is a fantastic addition to the Spider-Man legacy. Is it perfect? Well, no. But sometimes a movie doesn't have to be perfect for it to be very entertaining. I still believe TASM 2 has the best Spider-Man movement and web swing ever put on screen. But Brand New Day still has fantastic parts of it. But despite those criticisms, I had an amazing time watching this movie. Because at its core, this is a movie that understands Spider-Man. It understands that the mask is not what makes Peter Parker special. It's the person underneath it. the person who struggles, the person who sacrifices, the person who keeps getting back up. Brand New Day isn't just about Spider-Man getting a new adventure. It's about Peter Parker building a new beginning. A chance to rebuild. A chance to move forwards. A chance to prove that even after losing everything, he can still be a hero. And that is why Spider-Man continues to be the greatest superhero ever created. So guys, we have now reached the end of my video, and you guys are probably asking, what do I rate Spider-Man Brand New Day out of 10? And I would give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. You guys should definitely go and watch it whilst it's still in the cinema. Thank you everybody for watching. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe. And yeah, drop in the comments what reviews I should do next. Thank you everybody for watching, and remember, anyone can wear the mask.